Thunder cracked across the Montana sky as Aspen Valmont pulled her rain-soaked cloak tighter around her shoulders, urging her exhausted mare forward through the relentless downpour of 1878. Lightning illuminated the treacherous terrain ahead, revealing what appeared to be a dark shape slumped against a boulder, a shape that didn't belong among the natural contours of the wilderness. The 23-year-old woman hesitated, her heart pounding against her ribs. 2 years of living alone at her father's remote homestead had taught her caution, but something about that misshapen shadow called to her. Squinting through the rain, she guided her horse closer, the mare's hooves sinking into the mud with each careful step. "Hello." Aspen called, her voice nearly drowned by the rumbling sky. "Is someone there?" When no answer came, she dismounted, her boots landing with a splash in a puddle. Tethering her mare to a nearby scrub oak, she approached the mysterious form, one hand resting on the small revolver tucked in her skirt pocket, her father's final gift before consumption had claimed him. What she found made her breath catch in her throat. A man lay crumpled against the rocky outcropping, his face pale beneath a layer of mud and blood. His duster was torn and soaked through, not just with rain but with something darker spreading from his left side. A cowboy hat, once tan but now sodden brown, had fallen beside him. Aspen knelt beside him, ignoring the mud soaking into her skirt. Her fingers found his neck, searching for a pulse while rain washed down her face. There, faint but present, the rhythm of life still beat beneath his skin. "Sir," she touched his shoulder gently, "can you hear me?" The man's eyelids fluttered. When they opened, she found herself staring into eyes the color of a summer sky at dusk, deep blue with hints of gray around the edges. Pain clouded them, but there was something else there too, a sharp awareness that told her he wasn't surrendering to his wounds. "Madam," he rasped, attempting to sit up straighter before wincing, "you shouldn't be out here, not safe." Aspen's gaze dropped to the bloodstains spreading across his side. "You've been shot." "Notice that," he managed, the ghost of a smile crossing his pain-etched face. "Afraid I'm poor company at the moment. My homestead is about 2 miles east of here," she said, already calculating how to transport him. "I can help you, but you'll need to stand," the cowboy grimaced. "Don't reckon I can make it that far, madam. Best you ride on and forget you saw me." Aspen set her jaw. "I'm not leaving you here to die." Something in her tone must have convinced him, for the man studied her face with newfound intensity. "What's your name?" "Aspen. Aspen Valmont. Flynn," he replied, his voice growing weaker. "Flynn Vance." Aspen nodded, already removing her cloak to examine his wound more carefully. "Well, Mr. Vance, I'm going to save your life, whether you like it or not." The rain continued to pour as Aspen tore a strip from her petticoat to create a makeshift bandage. The bullet had entered his side, but without exiting, which meant the lead was still inside him. Her father had taught her basic medicine, a necessity in these remote parts, but extracting a bullet would test the limits of her knowledge. Flynn's breathing was becoming more labored, his skin clammy despite the cool rain. "You're stubborn," he observed between pained breaths. "So I've been told," Aspen replied, helping him to his feet with surprising strength for her slender frame. "My mare can carry us both, but you'll need to hold on." Getting the wounded cowboy onto the horse proved nearly impossible. Twice he nearly collapsed, and once his knees buckled entirely, sending them both into the mud. By the time Aspen had positioned herself in the saddle with Flynn slumped against her back, his arms weakly encircling her waist, her muscles burned with exertion. "Stay awake," she commanded as they began their slow journey. "Talk to me, Mr. Vance." "About what?" His voice was a warm breath against her neck, alarmingly faint. "Anything, where you're from, what brings you to this part of Montana." Flynn coughed, his grip momentarily tightening around her middle. "Texas originally, been drifting since the war." The rain began to ease as they rode, the clouds parting to reveal a pale moon illuminating their path. Aspen could feel Flynn's blood seeping through his makeshift bandage and onto her dress, but she kept her voice steady. "The war, you fought Confederate cavalry," he admitted. "Though I've regretted that choice, every day since, too young to understand what I was fighting for." Aspen nodded, though she knew he couldn't see her face. And now I drive cattle, or I did before." He trailed off, his weight shifting dangerously against her. Mr. Vance. Alarm shot through her. "Flynn, you need to stay awake." His only response was a barely audible groan. Aspen urged her mare faster, praying the jostling wouldn't worsen his condition. The modest cabin that had been her home these past years finally appeared through the trees, its single window glowing with the lamp she'd left burning. "We're here," she announced, relief washing over her. "Just hold on a little longer." Getting Flynn from the horse to the cabin proved even more difficult than mounting had been. By the time Aspen had half dragged, half carried him through her door, his consciousness was slipping away entirely, his tall frame becoming deadweight in her arms. She managed to lower him onto her bed, immediately lighting additional lamps to better see his wound. In the improved light, Flynn's condition appeared even more dire. His face was ashen, lips taking on a bluish tinge. The bullet wound continued to seep blood, and his breathing had grown shallow and irregular. Aspen worked with swift efficiency, cutting away his blood-soaked shirt to reveal a muscled torso marked with old scars, and more urgently, the angry wound in his side. She gathered her supplies whiskey for disinfecting, her sharpest knife heated in the fire, clean cloths, needle and thread, and the small medical kit her father had kept. "This will hurt," she warned, though she wasn't sure Flynn could hear her anymore. "But I have to get that bullet out." Taking a deep breath, Aspen poured whiskey over her hands and the knife. She hesitated only a moment before pressing the blade into his wound. Flynn's body jerked violently, a hoarse cry escaping his lips despite his semi-conscious state. She worked as quickly as she dared, probing for the bullet with the knife tip while blood welled around her fingers. After what seemed an eternity, the knife clinked against something metal. With trembling hands and sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill in the cabin, Aspen extracted the flattened bullet. "There," she whispered, dropping the bloodied lead into a bowl. "That's the worst of it over." She cleaned the wound thoroughly, stitched it closed with neat, small stitches her mother had taught her for mending, and bandaged it with clean cloths. Only when she had finished did Aspen realize how badly she was shaking. Flynn remained unconscious, his breathing steadier but still worryingly faint. Aspen pulled her rocking chair beside the bed and settled in for a long night of vigil. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving an eerie stillness in its wake. "Don't you die on me, Cowboy," she murmured, reaching out to brush a strand of dark hair from his forehead. "Not after all this trouble." The night crept forward with excruciating slowness. Aspen dozed intermittently in her chair, jerking awake at Flynn's every moan or shift. When dawn's first light filtered through the cabin window, she found herself staring at a face flushed with fever rather than the pallor of blood loss. The infection had set in quickly, as she'd feared it might. Aspen soaked cloths in cool water, placing them on Flynn's forehead and chest, trying to break the fever that raged through him. She spooned water between his cracked lips when possible and whispered encouragement when his fevered mind seemed lost in nightmares. "Easy," she soothed when he thrashed, calling out names she didn't recognize. "You're safe here." For 3 days, the battle continued. Aspen barely slept, catching moments of rest between changing bandages and brewing willow bark tea for when Flynn was lucid enough to swallow. She used the last of her precious store of honey to coat his parched throat and fed the chickens in the pre-dawn light before returning to her post at his bedside. On the morning of the 4th day, Aspen awoke with a start, realizing she'd fallen into a deeper sleep than intended. Panicked, she looked toward the bed and found Flynn's blue-gray eyes open and clear, watching her. "You're still here," he said, his voice hoarse but stronger than it had been. Aspen's exhaustion melted away as she hurried to his side. "Where else would I be?" "Most folks would have cut their losses by now." His gaze tracked her movements as she checked his bandages. "I'm not most folks." She pressed the back of her hand to his forehead. "Your fever's broken." Flynn attempted to sit up, grimacing at the pain but managing to prop himself against the headboard with Aspen's assistance. "How long have I been here?" 4 days. She poured a cup of fresh water from the pitcher beside the bed. "You've been more dead than alive for most of it." He accepted the water gratefully, his fingers brushing hers as he took the cup. "Then I owe you my life, Miss Valmont." "Aspen," she corrected. "And you can repay me by telling me who shot you and why." Flynn's expression darkened. "That's a complicated story. I've got time." Aspen settled back in her rocking chair, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance after days of neglecting her own needs. "And you're not going anywhere for a while." Flynn studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. "I was escorting a cattle drive from Wyoming to Fort Benton," he finally said. "We had a good herd, 30 men. Everything was going fine until we camped near Crow Land." Aspen nodded, understanding immediately. The tensions between settlers and the native tribes had escalated in recent years, despite treaties meant to protect tribal territories. "What happened?" she prompted when Flynn fell silent. "Some of the younger cowboys got liquored up, decided to do some hunting where they shouldn't have been." Disgust colored Flynn's voice. "I tried to stop them, but they wouldn't listen. They killed a Crow boy, couldn't have been more than 16. Aspen's hand flew to her mouth. "God in heaven, the tribe wanted justice. Can't blame them." Flynn's fingers tightened around the cup. "I rode to their camp to negotiate, offered to turn the men responsible over to the territorial authorities. But the trail boss man named Silas Blackburn had other ideas. When I returned to camp, he was planning an attack on the Crow village." "And you opposed him," Aspen guessed. Flynn nodded grimly. "Told the men I'd report them all to the army if they went through with it. That's when Silas shot me, left me for dead while they moved the herd on." Aspen absorbed this information, her expression troubled. "The Crow will retaliate. They already have, I expect." Flynn handed the empty cup back to her. "My only hope is they focused on Silas and his men, not innocent homesteaders." The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Aspen's isolated cabin could be vulnerable if the conflict spread. "We should be safe here," she said, though uncertainty crept into her voice. "My father traded fairly with the Crow for years. They know this homestead." Flynn's gaze swept around the modest cabin. "You live here alone since my father passed 2 years ago." Aspen stood, moving to stoke the fire. "It's just been me and 20 acres of struggle. No husband?" The question came carefully, as if Flynn wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Aspen shook her head. "Not much opportunity for courtship out here. The closest town is half a day's ride and the men there." She trailed off, busying herself with preparing a simple broth for her patient. "Not to your liking," Flynn supplied with the hint of a smile. "Let's just say I prefer my own company to theirs." She returned to his bedside with a steaming bowl. "Think you can eat something?" The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Flynn gained strength steadily, progressing from sitting up in bed to taking short walks around the cabin with Aspen's support. His wound healed cleanly, thanks to her diligent care and his own robust constitution. Aspen found herself enjoying the companionship after so long alone. Flynn proved to be a thoughtful conversationalist, sharing stories of his travels across the Western Territories without the braggadocio so common among cowboys. He listened intently when she spoke of her childhood in Missouri, her family's westward journey after the war, and her dreams of turning the struggling homestead into a prosperous farm. "Your father taught you well," Flynn observed one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. "Not many women could run a place like this alone." "He didn't have much choice," Aspen replied, her hands busy mending one of Flynn's shirts. "My mother died on the journey west. My brother joined the gold rushes in California and never returned. It was just Pa and me for years before the consumption took him." Flynn's gaze was warm on her profile. "You're remarkable, Aspen Valmont." She felt a blush rising to her cheeks, unfamiliar after years without such compliments. "I just do what needs doing, including saving strange cowboys you find bleeding in the rain." Aspen smiled despite herself. That was a first. Their quiet laughter faded into companionable silence as twilight deepened around them. Flynn's shoulder rested lightly against hers, a point of warmth in the cooling evening air. Neither moved away. A week after Flynn had first awakened, Aspen found him attempting to chop wood, his face tight with determination despite the obvious pain each swing of the axe caused. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, hurrying across the yard. Flynn paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Earning my keep. Can't have you doing everything while I lie around. You'll tear your stitches," Aspen scolded, taking the axe from his hands. "Then where will we be?" His fingers lingered on the handle, brushing against hers. "I can't keep imposing on your hospitality without contributing something, Aspen." The way he said her name sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. "You're not an imposition." Flynn's eyes held hers. "Even so, I need to feel useful." Aspen considered this, recognizing the pride that drove him. "Fine. You can help me with the garden. The beans need staking, and that won't strain your side too much." He nodded, clearly relieved to have been assigned a task, no matter how modest. They worked side by side through the morning, Flynn carefully placing stakes while Aspen guided the climbing bean plants to their supports. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by moments of silence that held no awkwardness. "Did you always want to be a cowboy?" Aspen asked as they paused to rest in the shade of a cottonwood. Flynn leaned back against the trunk, stretching his long legs before him. "No, my father had a small ranch outside San Antonio. I always thought I'd take it over someday, raise my own horses." A shadow crossed his face. "But the war changed everything." "How?" "Union soldiers burned it to the ground in '63. My father died defending it." His voice was matter of fact, the pain of the memory long since dulled to a persistent ache. After Appomattox, there was nothing to go back to. Aspen touched his arm lightly. "I'm sorry." Flynn covered her hand with his own. "It was a long time ago. What about you? Did you always envision this life?" "Hardly." Aspen laughed softly. "I was going to be a school teacher, had almost saved enough for teacher's college when Pa got sick after that." She gestured to the homestead around them. "This became home. I couldn't leave it." Flynn's gaze followed her gesture, taking in the modest cabin, the small barn, the carefully tended garden. "It's a good place, worth fighting for." "Yes," she agreed, suddenly conscious that his hand still rested on hers. "It is." That evening, as Aspen prepared their supper, she found herself humming a tune her mother had often sung, something she hadn't done in years. Flynn smiled from his seat at the table where he was cleaning her father's old revolver. "You have a nice voice," he commented. Aspen turned from the stove, a flush warming her cheeks. "I didn't realize I was singing." "Not singing exactly, humming." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "It's nice. This cabin's needed music." Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. "Are you saying I've been too quiet, Mr. Vance?" "I'm saying you deserve moments of joy, Miss Valmont." He set the revolver down carefully. "Everyone does." The simple statement, delivered with such sincerity, caught Aspen off guard. How long had it been since she'd thought about joy rather than mere survival? Since her father's death, each day had been a battle against nature, loneliness, and the constant threat of losing everything they'd built. "I suppose I'd forgotten that," she admitted quietly. Flynn rose from the table, moving to stand beside her at the stove. "Then I'm glad I'm here to remind you." Their eyes met, and for a breathless moment, Aspen thought he might touch her face, might lean down to close the distance between them. Instead, Flynn reached past her to lift the bubbling pot from the heat. "Your stew's about to boil over," he said softly. "Oh," Aspen broke from her trance, flustered. "Thank you." They ate supper with the cabin door open to catch the evening breeze, discussing practical matters, the need to repair the barn roof before winter, whether the potato crop would be sufficient, how soon Flynn might be strong enough to ride to town for supplies. Yet beneath the ordinary conversation ran an undercurrent of awareness, of possibilities neither was quite ready to name. That night, as had become their routine, Flynn bedded down on a pallet near the fireplace while Aspen took the bed. But sleep eluded her as she listened to his steady breathing across the darkened cabin. She found herself wondering what would happen when he was fully healed. Would he simply ride away, back to the life of a drifting cowboy? The thought created a hollow feeling in her chest that she wasn't prepared to examine too closely. Morning arrived with unexpected commotion, the frantic clucking of chickens and the whinny of Aspen's mare from the small corral. Flynn was on his feet before Aspen had fully awakened, the revolver in his hand. "Stay inside," he instructed, moving cautiously to the window. Aspen ignored him, grabbing her father's old rifle from above the door. "What is it?" Flynn's expression was grim. "Riders, 3 of them." Alarm shot through her. In 2 years, not a single visitor had appeared at her homestead unannounced. Silas's men can't tell yet. Flynn positioned himself beside the door. "But whoever they are, they've spooked the animals." Aspen joined him at the window, her heart pounding. The approaching riders were still some distance away, moving slowly along the rutted path that served as her connection to civilization. The lead rider's posture was familiar, causing her to lower her rifle slightly. "Wait," she said, squinting through the morning light. "I know him." "That's Albert Jenkins, the shopkeeper from Fort Benton." Flynn's tension didn't ease. What would bring a shopkeeper out this far, and who's with him? Aspen had no answer as they watched the riders approach. When they reached the clearing before the cabin, she recognized the second man as the territorial deputy she'd seen on her infrequent trips to town. The third rider was a stranger. "Miss Valmont," Albert called out, halting his horse. "Are you all right? We've come to check on you." Aspen exchanged a glance with Flynn before cautiously opening the door, keeping her rifle visible but lowered. "I'm fine, Mr. Jenkins. What brings you all this way?" The shopkeeper's gaze moved from Aspen to Flynn, who had positioned himself slightly behind her, his hand still on the revolver. "There's been trouble," Jenkins replied, dismounting. "Crow warriors attacked a cattle drive 10 days back, killed most of the outfit." Aspen felt Flynn stiffen beside her. "What happened?" she asked, already knowing part of the answer. The deputy spoke up, his hand resting meaningfully on his holster. "Seems the trail boss and some of his men killed a Crow boy. Tribe took revenge." His eyes narrowed at Flynn. "And you'd be Flynn Vance," he answered evenly. "I was with that drive." The atmosphere instantly charged with tension. The deputy's hand tightened on his holster. "That's so. The survivors mentioned a man named Vance who sided with the Indians." "I sided with justice," Flynn corrected, his voice hard. "Silas Blackburn shot me for trying to prevent more bloodshed." "That's not how Blackburn tells it," the third rider interjected, stepping forward. "He says you led the Crow to their camp, helped plan the attack." Aspen felt sick at the accusation. "That's a lie. Flynn nearly died from Blackburn's bullet. I found him wounded in the rain and brought him here." "He's been recovering ever since." The deputy studied them both, skepticism evident in his weathered face. "Convenient story. It's the truth," Flynn insisted. "Check my wound if you don't believe me." Aspen dug Blackburn's bullet out herself. Jenkins glanced between them, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "The reason we rode out, Miss Valmont, was to warn you. The Army's organizing a response to the attack. There's talk of forcing all the Crow onto the reservation. Things could get dangerous for isolated homesteads." "I've had no trouble with the Crow," Aspen replied firmly. "My father traded with them fairly for years." "That might not matter now," the deputy said. "Tensions are running high, and harboring a man suspected of aiding them won't help your situation." Flynn stepped forward, ignoring the way the deputy's hand moved to his gun. "I didn't aid the attack. I tried to prevent it by offering to turn the guilty men over to the law to you. Blackburn shot me because he wanted revenge instead of justice." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jenkins cleared his throat. "We should bring you both back to town," he suggested. "At least until things settle down. It's not safe out here." Aspen shook her head. "This is my home. I won't abandon it," the deputy frowned. "Miss Valmont, be reasonable." "A woman alone, she's not alone," Flynn interrupted, moving to stand beside her. "I'm staying." The declaration hung in the air, surprising even Aspen. She glanced at Flynn, finding his expression resolute. "That might not be wise," the third rider said, speaking directly to Flynn. "Blackburn's in town with the other survivors. He's calling for your arrest." Flynn's jaw tightened. "On what charges? I committed no crime." "Treason, he's saying," the deputy shrugged. "Won't stick, probably, but feelings are running high. Town might not be safe for you right now." Aspen felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Even if Flynn stayed to protect her homestead, how long before Blackburn or others came looking for him? And what would happen when they found him? Mr. Jenkins," she said, turning to the shopkeeper, who seemed the most reasonable of the three. "What exactly happened to the cattle drive? How many survived?" Jenkins removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair. "From what I heard, only Blackburn and 4 others made it to Fort Benton," said the Crow attacked at dawn, killed most before they could even grab their weapons. "And the cattle?" Flynn asked, scattered or taken. It was a slaughter, according to Blackburn. Flynn's expression darkened. If it happened as he claims, why did he and 4 others survive when 25 others didn't? Doesn't that strike you as strange? The deputy narrowed his eyes. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you investigate Blackburn more carefully before accepting his version of events." Flynn stood straight despite the pain Aspen knew still troubled his healing wound. "Check when they arrived in Fort Benton. Ask if they were driving any cattle at all." The 3 visitors exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, the deputy nodded reluctantly. "We'll look into it," he conceded. "But my advice stands. Both of you should come to town where it's safer." Aspen touched Flynn's arm lightly. "Could we have a moment to discuss this privately?" The men nodded, retreating to their horses. When they were out of earshot, Aspen turned to Flynn. "You should go with them," she said quietly. Flynn's eyebrows rose in surprise. "And leave you here alone? Not a chance." "Listen to me," Aspen insisted. "If Blackburn is in town spreading lies about you, you need to clear your name, and if he discovers you're here." She couldn't finish the thought. "I won't leave you unprotected." Flynn's voice was low but firm. Aspen met his gaze steadily. "I've been protecting myself for 2 years. I can handle a few more days." When he began to protest, she added, "Flynn, this isn't just about safety, it's about justice. If Blackburn killed those cowboys himself to cover his crimes against the Crow, he needs to be stopped before he incites a war." Flynn studied her face for a long moment. "You're asking me to leave you so I can confront a man who's already tried to kill me once." "I'm asking you to do what's right," Aspen corrected. "The same thing you tried to do for the Crow." The internal struggle played across Flynn's features. Finally, his shoulders sagged slightly in resignation. "I'll go to Fort Benton," he agreed reluctantly. "But only to clear my name and deal with Blackburn, then I'm coming straight back." The promise sent a flutter of warmth through Aspen's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'll expect you within the week, then." Flynn nodded, then surprised her by taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. "Stay safe, Aspen Valmont. I have too much to thank you for to lose you now." The gesture left her momentarily speechless. By the time she recovered, Flynn had already turned to inform the waiting men of his decision. Within the hour, the riders departed with Flynn among them, though not before he had privately shown the deputy his healing wound as evidence of his story. Aspen stood in her doorway watching until they disappeared over the ridge, an unexpected emptiness settling over the cabin that had briefly known the comfort of companionship. The days that followed passed with excruciating slowness. Aspen threw herself into her chores, working from dawn until dusk to keep her thoughts from constantly returning to Flynn. She repaired fences, weeded the garden with fierce determination, and even began the barn roof repairs she'd discussed with Flynn, though the work was harder without his help. Each night she found herself listening for approaching hoofbeats, for any sign of Flynn's return. And each night she chided herself for such foolishness. Flynn Vance was a drifter, a cowboy with no permanent home. He might have promised to return, but men's promises often evaporated like morning dew once they rode beyond sight. On the 5th day after Flynn's departure, Aspen was returning from the creek with water when she noticed a thin column of smoke rising from beyond the northern ridge of her property. Alarm immediately tightened her chest. Any fire in this dry season could quickly become uncontrollable. Setting down her buckets, she hurried back to the cabin for her spyglass. From her porch, she trained it on the smoke source, expecting perhaps a campfire from passing travelers. What she saw instead made her blood run cold. 4 riders moved methodically through the valley beyond her property, setting fire to the dry grass as they went. They weren't trying to contain the blaze, but deliberately spreading it, creating a line of fire that the prevailing wind would drive directly toward her homestead. Aspen's mind raced. The creek might provide some barrier, but if the fire gained enough strength, it would jump that modest defense with ease. She had perhaps an hour, maybe less, before the flames reached her. Working frantically, Aspen gathered what she could: her mother's locket, her father's Bible, a small pouch of coins, and some clothing. She hitched her mare to the small wagon, loaded her few precious possessions, and herded her chickens into a crate. As she worked, another realization struck her: the riders setting the fire were moving toward her cabin, not away from it. This was no random act. They were coming for her. Blackburn, she thought with sudden certainty. He must have discovered Flynn had been staying with her. Abandoning her loading, Aspen grabbed her rifle and ran to the small rise behind her cabin that offered the best vantage point. Through the spyglass, she could now make out the riders more clearly. Though she had never met Silas Blackburn, she could guess which rider he was, the one gesturing commands to the others, his posture radiating arrogant authority even at this distance. They were less than a mile away now, the fire they'd set spreading rapidly through the dry grass. Smoke began to sting Aspen's eyes as she hurried back to the cabin, mind churning through limited options. She could flee, abandoning everything her father had built, or she could stay and fight, one woman against 4 armed men with a wildfire as their advance weapon. The decision was made in an instant. Aspen would not surrender her home without a fight. Quickly, she moved her mare and wagon to the creek, where the animal would have the best chance of escaping the flames. Then she returned to the cabin, barred the door, and loaded both her rifle and revolver. From the window, she watched the approaching wall of fire with grim determination. Her only advantage lay in the creek, and the firebreak she and her father had plowed years ago, a wide strip of turned earth encircling the cabin and barn that might slow the flames long enough for help to arrive. If help was coming at all, the first flames reached the creek just as the riders appeared at the edge of her property. Aspen could see them clearly now, Blackburn in the lead, his face twisted with a cruel smile as he watched the fire do his work. Behind him rode 3 hardened men, guns drawn as they approached the cabin. "Miss Valmont," Blackburn called out, his voice carrying over the crackling of the advancing fire. "Come on out now, we just want to talk about your friend Vance." Aspen remained silent, watching through a crack in the shutters as they drew closer. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Blackburn continued, stopping his horse 30 yards from the cabin. "Tell us where Vance went and we'll help you put out this unfortunate fire." The audacity of his offer, help extinguishing the very blaze he had set, nearly made Aspen laugh despite her fear. Instead, she steadied her rifle against the windowsill, taking careful aim at the ground near Blackburn's horse. The shot rang out, sending dirt spraying just inches from the horse's hooves. The animal reared in panic, nearly unseating its rider. "That's my only warning," Aspen called out when the echo faded. "The next one won't miss," Blackburn's face contorted with rage. "You stupid woman. You're dead anyway once that fire reaches your cabin. Tell us where Vance went." "He went to Fort Benton," Aspen replied coolly, "to tell the truth about what you did to those cowboys and the Crow boy." A flash of alarm crossed Blackburn's features before he masked it with contempt. "No one will believe him over me. I'm a respected trail boss. He's nothing but a traitor." "Then why are you so afraid of him?" Aspen challenged, her finger steady on the trigger as she shifted her aim slightly. Blackburn signaled to his men, who began to spread out, clearly intending to surround the cabin. The fire had reached the creek now, flames leaping high as they consumed the dry brush along the banks. Some sections were jumping the waterway, just as Aspen had feared. "Last chance," Blackburn warned, drawing his own pistol. "Come out, or we burn you out." Aspen's answer was another rifle shot, this one deliberately wide. She couldn't afford to kill not yet, but needed to keep them at bay as long as possible. If Flynn had succeeded in convincing the authorities of Blackburn's crimes, help might already be on the way. The standoff continued as the fire reached her property line. The firebreak slowed its advance, but embers carried on the wind ignited smaller blazes beyond the plowed earth. Smoke began to fill the cabin despite the closed shutters, making Aspen's eyes water and her lungs burn. One of Blackburn's men made a dash toward the barn, presumably looking for another approach to the cabin. Aspen's shot caught him in the leg, sending him sprawling with a howl of pain. The others responded with a volley of gunfire that splintered the cabin's shutters and embedded in the logs. Crouching below the window, Aspen reloaded her rifle with trembling hands. The smoke was growing thicker, and she could feel heat radiating through the cabin walls as smaller fires encroached on the building. Her situation was becoming desperate. A sudden commotion outside drew her attention. Through the damaged shutters, she saw what appeared to be a new group of riders approaching rapidly from the east from the direction of Fort Benton. "Blackburn," a familiar voice shouted above the roar of the fire. "Drop your weapons." Flynn's voice sent a surge of hope through Aspen's chest. He had returned, and he wasn't alone. Through the smoke, she could make out the deputy who had visited days earlier, along with several other armed men. Blackburn and his remaining men turned to face the new threat, guns raised. For a terrible moment, Aspen feared a shootout would erupt with her cabin caught in the crossfire. Then one of Blackburn's men threw down his weapon, clearly unwilling to face such odds. "It's over, Silas," Flynn called out, dismounting and advancing with his revolver trained on the trail boss. "We found the bodies of the cowboys you killed. Your men have already confessed." Blackburn's face contorted with fury. "You're lying. 3 graves just outside Fort Benton," the deputy confirmed, moving to flank Flynn. "Shallow enough that a dog dug up one of the hands. And your man, Peters, broke down when we questioned him. Told us everything about how you killed the Crow boy, then murdered your own men when they wouldn't support your plan for revenge." Aspen watched, heart pounding, as Blackburn's options visibly dwindled before him. The fire was closing in from multiple directions now, and his former allies were surrendering one by one. With a howl of rage, Blackburn raised his gun toward Flynn. "You ruined everything." Aspen didn't hesitate. Her rifle cracked, the bullet striking Blackburn's arm. His shot went wild as he dropped his weapon, clutching at the wound. The standoff dissolved into swift action as the deputy and his men secured Blackburn and his remaining allies. Flynn, however, raced directly to the cabin, calling Aspen's name with undisguised panic. "I'm here," she cried, unbarring the door and stumbling into the smoke-filled yard. Flynn caught her in his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart hammering against hers. "Thank God," he breathed against her hair, "when we saw the fire." Their reunion was cut short by the deputy's shout. "We need to fight this fire now, or the whole valley could go up." The next hours passed in a blur of exhausting work. Everyone, including the prisoners under guard, formed bucket lines from the creek to the burning areas. The firebreak had held in some sections, giving them a chance to contain the worst of the blaze. By nightfall, they had managed to save the cabin and barn, though much of the surrounding land was scorched black. When the last ember was extinguished, Aspen could barely stand from fatigue. Her hands were blistered from the bucket ropes, her lungs raw from smoke, her dress ruined beyond repair. Yet as she surveyed what remained of her homestead, a profound sense of gratitude washed over her, not just for what had been saved, but for who had returned to save it. Flynn approached as the deputy and his men prepared to depart with their prisoners. His face was streaked with soot, his clothes singed in places, but his eyes shone with an intensity that made Aspen's breath catch. "They're taking Blackburn and his men back to Fort Benton to stand trial," he informed her. "The deputy says they'll hang for what they did." Aspen nodded, suddenly uncertain what to say. The danger had passed, the immediate crisis resolved. What remained unspoken between them seemed both more important and more fragile than ever. "You came back," she finally said, the simple statement carrying all her surprise and gratitude. Flynn's expression softened. "I promised I would. I didn't know if." She hesitated, unsure how to express her doubts without sounding accusatory. "If I'd keep my word," Flynn finished gently. "Aspen, I rode out of here intending to return the moment I'd settled things with Blackburn, not just because I owed you my life, but because—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words, "because the thought of not seeing you again was worse than facing Blackburn." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Aspen felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the recently extinguished fires. I'm glad, she admitted quietly. The cabin felt empty without you. Flynn took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his blue-gray eyes. When I was in town, clearing my name, all I could think about was getting back here. Not to the place, but to you. His voice lowered. I've been drifting since the war, Aspen, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, but these past weeks with you, even wounded and useless as I was. He shook his head in wonder. I felt something I haven't felt in years, like I belonged somewhere. Aspen's heart thundered in her chest. And where is that Flynn Vance, wherever you are? He reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. If you'll have me. The simple honesty of his words, devoid of flowery declarations or grand promises, touched Aspen more deeply than any practiced romance could have. This was a man who had seen the worst of her circumstances, her isolation, her struggles, the modest life she led, and still wanted to stay. My homestead isn't much, she said, glancing around at the fire-damaged land. It'll take years to build it into something prosperous. Flynn's smile was warm as his hand found hers. Then it's fortunate I'm planning to be here for years. Aspen closed the distance between them, her free hand resting lightly on his chest. In that case, Mr. Vance, I believe I will have you. Their first kiss tasted of smoke and promise, tentative at first, then deepening with shared certainty. When they finally parted, Flynn kept his arms around her, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. You know, he murmured against her temple, when you found me wounded in that rainstorm, I thought you were an angel come to guide me to the hereafter. Aspen laughed softly. And instead, you got a stubborn woman who wouldn't leave your side. Much better, Flynn assured her, pressing another kiss to her forehead. Angels are fine for the afterlife, but for this life, I'd rather have you. As dusk settled over the valley, they stood together surveying what remained and what could be rebuilt. The land was scarred but not destroyed. With time and care, the grasses would return, greener than before. The cabin stood firm, as it had through years of Montana winters and summers. Tomorrow, Flynn said, his arm secure around Aspen's waist, we'll ride into town and get supplies to start repairs. We'll need seeds too, Aspen added, her practical nature reasserting itself. To replant what was lost. Flynn nodded, his expression thoughtful. I was thinking, once things are stable here, maybe we could add onto the cabin, another room or two. The implication wasn't lost on Aspen. Planning for a family, Mr. Vance? Hoping for one, Miss Valmont. His smile held a question. Aspen answered it by rising on her toes to kiss him again. I'd like that very much. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers carpeting the once blackened hills around the homestead. True to his word, Flynn had spent the winter making improvements to the cabin, adding a second bedroom and expanding the main living area. Together, they had repaired the fire damage, replanted the scorched fields, and even increased the chicken flock. News had reached them through occasional visitors that Silas Blackburn and 2 of his men had been hanged in Fort Benton, while the others received prison sentences for their roles in the murders. The Crow tribe, vindicated by the justice served, had returned to more peaceful relations with the settlers. On a perfect April morning, with the scent of new growth filling the air, Aspen Valmont became Aspen Vance in a small ceremony conducted by the circuit preacher who visited the remote homesteads quarterly. Albert Jenkins and his wife made the journey from Fort Benton to serve as witnesses. Along with several neighboring homesteaders, Aspen had barely known before Flynn's arrival brought them into her isolated world. Never thought I'd see the day when Flynn Vance settled down, Jenkins commented good-naturedly during the modest celebration that followed. You've worked a miracle, Mrs. Vance. Aspen smiled, watching as her new husband helped a neighbor's child mount her mare for a short ride around the corral. The miracle was finding him in the rain that night, she replied. Everything since has simply been life as it should be. That evening, after their guests had departed, Flynn and Aspen sat on their expanded porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. His arm rested comfortably around her shoulders, her head nestled against his chest. Happy? Flynn asked softly, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. Aspen nodded, contentment warming her from within. More than I ever thought possible, Flynn's lips brushed her temple. When I rode with that cattle drive last year, I never imagined I'd find everything I'd been searching for at the end of it. You mean when you were bleeding in the rain? Aspen teased gently, especially then. His voice grew serious. I've been thinking about what might have happened if you hadn't found me that night. Aspen shivered despite the mild evening. Don't, you're here now, we're here. Flynn tightened his embrace. And I'm not going anywhere, Mrs. Vance, not for all the cattle drives in Montana. As darkness settled over their home, Aspen reflected on the strange turns of fate that had brought them together. A wounded cowboy in the rain, a woman who refused to leave his side. From those unlikely beginnings had grown something neither had dared hope for, a love as vast and enduring as the Montana sky above them, and a future stretching out before them like the endless prairie, full of promise and possibility. 5 years later, the Vance homestead had transformed from a struggling widow's claim to one of the most prosperous small ranches in the territory. The fire-scarred land had rejuvenated with careful stewardship, now supporting a modest herd of cattle and several fine horses that Flynn bred and trained. The cabin had expanded again to accommodate their growing family, twin boys now 3 years old, with Flynn's dark hair and Aspen's determined spirit, and a baby girl with a dusting of copper curls who had arrived just 6 months earlier. On the anniversary of the day Aspen had found Flynn wounded in the rain, they maintained a private tradition. While a neighbor watched the children, they rode together to the spot where their paths had first crossed, now marked by a small cairn of stones. 5 years, Flynn marveled as they dismounted beside the marker. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you saved my life. Aspen took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his as naturally as breathing, and sometimes it feels like you've always been part of mine. Flynn pulled her close, his kiss still kindling the same warmth it had on that smoke-filled day when he'd finally declared his intentions. When they parted, his expression had grown thoughtful. I got a letter from that ranger friend of mine in Texas, he said. Says there's good land opening up near San Antonio. Some of it's not far from where my father's ranch used to be. Aspen studied his face, searching for signs of restlessness or regret. Do you miss Texas? Flynn shook his head, his gaze sweeping over the Montana landscape they'd made their own. No, but I've been thinking about the future, about the children having more opportunities than these remote hills can offer. And, Aspen prompted gently, and I realized something. Flynn's smile deepened the creases at the corners of his eyes, lines earned through both hardship and joy. Home isn't about the land under our feet, it's about who stands beside us on that land. Aspen leaned into his embrace, understanding perfectly. So we're staying, if that's what you want. His arms tightened around her. The boys will need room to grow. This valley has given us everything we needed so far, including each other, Aspen reminded him, resting her head against his chest. I can't imagine being anywhere else. As they mounted their horses to return to their waiting children, Aspen took a last look at the cairn marking their beginning. The wounded cowboy in the rain had healed to become her partner, her husband, the father of her children. The woman who wouldn't leave his side had found in him the companion she'd never dared hope for in her isolated existence. Together, they rode home through the golden afternoon light, toward the life they had built from an unlikely encounter and an unwavering refusal to give up on each other. Behind them lay the past with all its struggles and sorrows. Before them stretched a future they would continue to forge together, come rain or shine.